Yes, thank you. Sorry. Good night.
Okay. Okay.
Good morning and welcome to the July 18th, 2024 Audit Committee meeting. The time is 10:33 and I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we have a tennis roll.
Yes, Commissioner. So we have 4 of the 5 members present. Miss Beth Higgins is absent today.
Thank you. So with that said, we'll go ahead and review and approve of the minutes, meeting minutes on June 6th, 2024. And hopefully everybody had an opportunity to read those minutes. If not, I give you a few minutes. And were there any questions or any corrections? I get a motion to approve the minutes of June 6, 2024.
Second.
It's been approved. Been motioned by Carl Blunt, second by Nolan Thomas. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all. So Gavin, if you want to go ahead and get started with item number D.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. So just to recap, last month, I'm sorry.
Well, you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I do want to welcome
Yep.
our interim manager, Nikki Jones, to our meeting. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry about that. No, I appreciate you doing that. So last month, we gave you an update on the audit work plan and let you know, with your approval last month, that economic development would be moving forward. So that did get on the agenda of the mayor and commission for this current cycle. The agenda setting was on Tuesday and ultimately up for hopefully a vote on the August 6th meeting for the economic development audit. And with regard to the human resources audit, you all did receive the original report last month for the first time. Since then, we were waiting on management and department response during their 30-day window. We're happy to report that we did receive that on time. It's incorporated now into the report for you, which you have. And so unless you all feel otherwise, we would be looking for a vote from this committee today regarding the human resources audit to be able to forward that on to the mayor and commission for the August-September cycle. If not, that's perfectly fine. Just keep in mind also that this body is not expected to meet next month. So if we were to continue the conversation on HR, it would first be at your September audit committee meeting, if you were. But otherwise, we're happy to answer any questions with regard to the human resources audit. Just real quickly, to sort of recap this audit, this is a bit different from the 2 that you previously saw come out of our office. This was the comprehensive audit out of the entire work plan, so a little bit larger and more in-depth scope than the periodic audits. Instead of touching upon sort of a brief in-time financial performance and compliance status update with the periodic audits, this particular audit was a performance audit, comprehensive one on a specific program or practice related to recruitment, hiring, and orientation. So although we do touch upon a bit different factors that affect that throughout the HR department, this was not an HR departmental audit. So we tried to maintain that focus specifically on employee recruitment, hiring, and orientation. And from being a performance audit, it is very qualitative in nature. When you look at the scope and the objective, it was designed that way. We used words carefully in our scope to evaluate processes and procedures, not necessarily quantify those things. So Ultimately, we did have, I think, good productive conversations and interactions with HR and management. We certainly have some findings and recommendations, and we received those responses. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
And you know, would you like to come in or make about
Sure. I think that the audit office has done a great job with their audits, economic development, and recently HR specifically on some of those factors that they looked at. You know, I mentioned at the agenda setting meeting that, you know, we have very passionate employees. They care about what they do, and, you know, the change is hard. And so sometimes when the audit committee points out something, it's a deviation from what they've done, whether they agree with it or not. It's just hard. So our HR folks, I'm proud of them. They responded. They, you know, they didn't necessarily agree with everything. However, they recognized that the audit committee, or Gavin, pointed out something very specific, things very specific that they needed to do and change for the betterment of the organization, and they accepted that. So I think what we can see moving forward are moving forward with those changes. So I appreciate the work that y'all done.
And to his point, one of the conversations that came up on Tuesday, I go back to the economic development report and audit. Some of the commissioners felt like, although there was some pushback, and Manager Jones made a very good point. It's okay for employees sometimes not agree with things, and they're welcome to say, well, you know, we see what you came up with, but you know, some of these things we don't agree with. And I think what the commissioners want to see going forward, we'll come back within a year's time and Gavin explain that and go back over and say, okay, have these things been done? Something that was suggested, but there was some of our commissioners did have some concerns about some of the comments that the economic development staff had made, and they may see the same thing when we talk about the HR audit. But so I did want you all to know about that, and those conversations came up. Commissioner Mike, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think actually it was a very brief discussion. You know, we had a lot on our agenda, and we were just getting back in there. Long meeting. We were fully in meetings from 4 to 9 or almost 10. I think it was 9. It was 9. I should say that. But you know, I read over this yesterday pretty carefully. I am I should just say, like, glad that we have staff who feel that they're able to talk honestly and disagree and agree on different things in here. That I'd much rather have that than just sort of some glossed over thing where you're like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, and not have that open discussion on that. So I'm really glad of that. I mean, in terms of the audit, you know, there's a couple of things that stood out to me, just in terms of understanding the HR department and such. And you know, one, I would like to come back. I'm just going to try to summarize them because I haven't. They're coming to my head right now, but I really wanted a better understanding. And of we have a very large, compared to the other entities that were reviewed in the comparative analysis, we have more people in our staff. However, I was also looking at I don't know where it was, because I just looked at it. There was one page where you all did this. Actually, it was on page 69.
Which page is that you're looking at?
This is at the end.
That's
This is
in the
actually
appendix.
83,
Yeah,
so it's
okay.
very handy.
Thanks.
Very handy, because I was noticing that before and I had not gotten that. But then on page 69, you all seem to give you know, it says HR oversees that in some manner impact, you know, HR oversees all these things in this long bulleted list. And so one thing I wanted to understand, because it's pretty glaring that our staff, we have a larger staff, with the exception of Gwinnett, but Gwinnett is so much larger. And proportion wise too, to the population. But you know, I don't know if our HR department has certain responsibilities that others don't have. I know, for example, we have our self-funded, insurance and the wellness that might account for a lot. That's something that sticks out here. And again, having looked at the conclusions, again, the findings and the responses there at the end, one thing that sticks out, actually, again, right at the end, is the number of new employees in the department. I mean, it's something like, I don't know, 46% have been here less than 2 years. So I think that is on page 70. Yeah,
It is.
45%. So, I mean, it's the fact that we don't have we're missing the head of the department, we're missing the assistant head of the department, and then we have 45% of the staff that have been here less than 2 years. And if you look at the administrators, there's only one that's been here more than, there's one that 8 years, right? So the others are fairly new to the organization. I would say, I mean, I feel like I'm new to the organization, but I've been here longer than all of these people. So, it, for various reasons, there's a lot of flux, there's a lot of newness in here. So, that was just an interesting note for me, and hopefully, and I'm glad we have the manager's office in here, because I'm really curious where we are in the hiring process for a department head for this department. Because this document itself will be a handy document to have to move forward to address some of these things and reflect on them. And of course, hopefully the person who comes in will have much more experience in HR than our Office of Operations, right? They'll have looked at it and be coming in fresh. So I just was curious whether or not you had any comments on the staffing and for Clarke County and why our staffing is higher, and looking at that going forward with our leadership, where we are in that.
Sure, and I'll certainly allow Manager Jones to sort of comment on this, but I want to sort of set the stage a little bit on the background.
Mhm.
The comparative analysis was certainly lengthy. We did 4 different comparative analysis groups, if you will. One thing, though, that we want to make clear is that although we did this analysis and it helps from an educational standpoint, it wasn't used solely to make determinations on HR, because of the fact that so many factors can fluctuate from city to city or from county to county. So, for example, a county could also have multiple cities in it that all have their own HR departments, therefore, shifting the numbers of staff. Also, depending on the data that we could find and obtain, our number includes part-time staff as well. So 33 total, 25 of which are full-time. Some of the numbers from the other jurisdictions may or may not include some of their part-time staff. The other thing is like you pointed out, Commissioner, it varies across the board with regard to responsibility of HR departments. All of them, I could probably safely say, do the recruitment, hiring, and orientation process. But then after that, not everybody does safety and risk within their HR department. Some of them incorporate organizational development training in their department where we don't. Same with payroll. Payroll sometimes is a function of the finance department. It's in our HR department. So a lot of those things can sort of set the basis, and we sort of highlight that in that specific section. Ultimately, I think what we found, and we sort of concluded that section with it, is that when comparing against the 5 other unified governments or consolidated governments within Georgia, we're not off. We don't hold the worst vacancy rate in town or anything like that. We're actually doing pretty well when comparing to some of those other consolidated governments. But the point of the comparative analysis was also to point out, although we're doing well, and for the sake of argument, a lot of argument is, how are we doing compared to other people? It sort of dismisses some of the false claims, if you will, that, we're just not doing well. No, that's not the case. but is there room for improvement? Absolutely. And so with that, though, I'll turn it over to Manager Jones with regard to the leadership process right now with
Sure, certainly. So if I could add, though, the unified government is a very unique form of government, right? Just across the country. I can't remember, Blaine would always say it's like 28 unified governments or consolidated governments across the country. And we have several of them here in the state of Georgia, but within even the state of Georgia, the unified government is very different than other unified governments. We function differently. Our processes are different. As you know, Athens is different. And I think our HR department is a reflection of that. So now let me speak to as far as HR leadership. Oddly enough, just finished a final interview. So I will be conducting reference checks today, tomorrow for an HR director. Hopefully I will have an announcement, if all goes well, by the end of next week. And I will keep everyone posted, of course. So we're looking forward to it, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say the folks that we have in there right now, because of all the change, have done a heck of a job.
Oh, yeah.
If I may ask for a little background, why has there been so much change?
Certainly. Well, a number of reasons. I think retirement, just because it's time. Candidly, there's been a change in the workforce, right? Like the workforce is different now than it was before. And, I remember a previous manager saying, it's just my time to go because, I can just see it's my time. So there's some of that. Some of it's related to the amount of work. Okay, so there's just a lot of work that's ahead of us. So mind you, the unified government hasn't completed a pay study in 20 years before we did the last pay study. So that created a lot of tension, and that's a lot of work. And so the HR department, it's not an easy department to work because everybody is needing something from HR. So it's a rigorous department to work in. So, some folks think it's time to go. Some folks think it's the workload. Some folks think it's the cadence of the work. All those things create turnover. But at the end of the day, I was just talking to the HR folks, so this is fresh in my mind. They've got a good culture over there. It's a big family over there. So the folks that are there are committed. But you see, a lot of the folks that are there are new as well.
Right.
So, but they do have some longstanding people, probably 4 or 5 folks who've been there for a really long time, and they're kind of keeping it together. And so they're keeping that culture alive, and the new people have bought into the culture. And whoever we hire to be the director, of course, will be an agent of change in some instances. For example, technology is one thing that I'm looking forward to changing, but they will also be an agent of continuation of that culture. So.
Yeah, I mean, as has already been mentioned, so not to belabor the point too much, to a certain degree, the only thing that we should be looking at are the other consolidated governments. Because to look at, I know we have to look at these other metrics, but those are all figures in terms of the setup they have, in terms of what their responsibilities are. And yes, while the overall number of staff is clearly an outlier, being at 30, if you look at the budget per HR employee, it's the lowest. So, which is a reflection of the fact that all these people are new.
Yeah.
And, also the bang for the buck, their employment percentage is at 86%, which is not necessarily the best, but certainly not the worst either. And Athens being the town it is, being a college town, we're in a constant state of flux for all sorts of things, especially as it relates to employment. So, that's kind of what I expected to see, something along those lines.
Of course, the good thing, what people don't know, our police department, they fully staffed now.
Right.
Which is unusual. I mean, you got all these other counties around us. They're catching the dickens, trying to get officers.
Yeah.
So that's a plus for us, especially based on what UGA starting their officers out at now, $70,000 start out at UGA, coming out of the academy.
Right.
So we having to deal with that just locally. And then think about our surrounding counties. So we, I applaud our chief for being able to, staff. We fully staff now, which is unusual for public safety.
And also, and granted, this is all just anecdotal, and what do I know? But you look at the way Athens-Clarke County is run versus, you know, the anecdotal stories you hear about issues with other governments, and not just from the people who just constantly complain about everything, like things you hear from people who know, things you read. I don't care what anybody says. Athens-Clarke County's got an excellent government. I'm not just saying that because of the government employees. It could be
Yeah.
a lot worse.
Yeah.
You see it and hear it
Yeah.
daily, yes.
Yes. So anyway.
And we hear these things when we go to our conferences, and you do, you know, we look at Columbus, Muskogee, they're unified. Bacon Bill, they're unified. Richland,
Augusta Richland.
Richland,
Right.
they're unified. So we have those conversations when we go to our conferences and we talk to each other about, and everybody got pretty much the same type of issues going on: housing, homeless, you know, people want their road fixed. It's almost got the same thing. It's just a matter of how you get it done, you know, in a timely manner. So, yeah.
Oh, I did want to ask some more about the finding number 2, the lack of consistency and understanding among and ownership of recruiting, hiring, and orientation practices. On
What
that,
page scale?
that's on page 53. And then there's a long discussion here. And the other thing in terms of in terms of the audit, before I ask some questions about that process, is I would imagine, and perhaps Manager Jones can, you know, tell me if I'm right on this or not. I would imagine, because these comments are coming from our acting department head and assistant head. That's a person who's not in that full leadership role all the time. If it were me in there, I would tend to feel more conservative, like these are the things that we're doing, like not in a position where I could be saying, hey, we need to change this and this and this, because I am not ultimately the head of that department. And so I think that's also something to consider and something that's understandable. I think it would be a little bit reckless for that person to then be making grand statements about changes when that person was in an interim position. So I think that's important for us to realize. But in the recruitment, hiring, and orientation process, because these are questions I know some of us are thought about, and this is a very basic question. And like Carl says so humbly, what do I know here on here? But I do know, as someone who, I'm bringing my own experience of hiring at Athens-Tech, and I know that there was I can remember when I moved into the dean position, and I was like, okay, like where's the standard operating procedure? Where's the 1 to 2 page checklist of all the steps that are there? And it wasn't. I was like, how can this not exist in this large organization, like something that's written down? So I would like recreate these things. I was, created a lot of documents there internally, and I wasn't quite sure from this if there actually was. And I realize things are different in different departments, but having worked in HR, there's a lot of similarity in the steps of things that have to get done from the posting the job announcement to there. Is there is there a checklist that if I was taken over, like when this new person comes in, you'd say, okay, here's the checklist of all the steps that go through?
Sure. I mean, so in observing HR and specifically the RHL practices, what we found is that, yes, to a degree, there are SOPs in place amongst some of the employment division staff. There is a little bit of inconsistency at times, but I think some of that, like we just pointed out, can be between existing employees and new employees that come on board. Where I think a lot of our basis for the finding came from is it's not just HR though. This is a collaborative effort between HR and the departments that are wanting to hire someone. And that communication sometimes is where there was challenges, that expectations and understanding of who's in charge of what and what is being done when differs when you get outside the division of employment and you start talking with the people that are working with that division, that's where a lot of this started to come. So I think it's not insurmountable. There are certainly ways that we can communicate some of those same SOPs that already exist in employment with the partnering departments so that everybody's on the same page.
Right, I would imagine that there would be like a, you know, some things may differ, so there may be a template that then could be adapted by
Sure.
the different departments. Likewise, I remember having this discussion, and I saw something in here, I can't remember where I put it, but in the way this works, there's like, if you're in the department, you're the department head hiring, putting this together. There are some instances where you have to have, I assume it's a generalist now, the HR generalist in your interview, and there's some where you don't. And somewhere in here, it became clear to me that if the hiring department chair did the training that was there, is that an extensive training? And, you know, why doesn't everyone just do that training? I mean, like, it's a training about how to do an interview and follow the rules, right?
So,
Or is-
Manager Jones can certainly maybe follow up on that, but yes, I mean, you're correct, Commissioner Myers, that departments, hiring managers specifically within departments, which everyone is not a hiring manager, obviously, you have to be a supervisory level
Yeah.
for that. There is an option, though, again, that one tends to fluctuate depending on who you ask as to whether we're going to continue that practice or not continue that practice and who's allowed and who's not. But there is an option for those individuals to take a course. It's not that extensive. Some of it's like a 3-4 hour afternoon class, and then there's also a follow-up in-person couple interviews to see
Right.
you do it in practice. If you pass that course, though, you're essentially deemed eligible to conduct interviews as if you were representing HR to make from that aspect. A lot of the people that have taken that class and hold that designation are those that tend to do interviews on a regular, almost weekly basis. Some of where there's a high turnover
right.
in jobs. The reason I think that some people choose not to partake in that practice is they just feel more comfortable with an HR person in the room, and that's their choice essentially. That I don't want there to be any question whatsoever of what went on during this interview from a liability standpoint. I want the HR person here, regardless of the fact that I could probably do it myself.
So in a department like Transportation and Public Works that has a whole lot of people that are on the ground, who does the hiring of the people who are, you know, like there's a crew out in my neighborhood working on something. Who does the hiring, the interviewing of those people?
Sure, it can vary by department based on the hierarchy that's put in place by the director, but ultimately, you know, for TPW, for an example, I would say the majority of hiring is done at the administrator level from a divisional standpoint. So if you have streets and drainage, for example, in those crews, the superintendent of streets and drainage will ultimately be the one making the decision on the hire, although through the computer system, the director ultimately still has to push a button to say accept. But that director or assistant director is not in those interviews of, you know, grounds worker one or equipment operator.
Yeah, and the other thing here that I remember you and I talking about, and I see there was disagreement, that you made a recommendation, you all, to allow hiring managers the choice of viewing all applications if they desire. And I know that the reaction was, actually, was there, was disagree with that. And I wasn't quite sure what that said there. Yeah, I mean, it says allow hiring choices of you, and then it starts saying the personnel or may reject any application and exclude the name of applicant. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I guess there was also the question of getting the directors to see applications as they're coming in. And here, I guess it's saying it has to wait till 5 days after, and then you can start releasing some of those until the closing date.
So what I think you might be getting at, Commissioner, specifically with that one, because we noticed that as well, is although I think HR's response is to, hesitate a bit on allowing that.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure that disagree is maybe exactly what they meant, because as you just pointed out
Yeah.
further on in the explanation, it's not that it can't happen, because
Yeah.
it does happen. It just doesn't happen automatically. But there is a way that they explain after 5 working days that, they could go forward as long as there's clarity with department directors. And after a 5-day period, we can do that. If you essentially write in the comment box that this is how you want it, we can do that. So, in my mind, I almost view that one as a partially agree.
Right.
Yes, I think there's a way for that to occur, because that is something that we did observe and hear from different departments on, is, a desire to have the option at least.
Yeah,
to
and I
ask
think
that.
the response here actually seems to be a little bit different than it says allow hiring managers the choice of viewing all applications. To me, that indicates that rather than just seeing the ones that were sort of approved by HR, to see the whole lot, the response seems to be more about when you were able to see the applications. So it doesn't seem like that response really goes to the first part in there, unless I'm missing something. I was trying to read this.
I want to follow up on Mr. Myers' point. And I don't know, and I tried to see, I didn't see it unless I missed it. The hiring manager, do they have access to the applications for the department, or they don't? I couldn't figure out whether that was
Sure.
the case.
So the way the system is set up with the software program, which is what everybody uses with the exception of courts and elected officials, is basically, if I were to put in a job posting and I'm waiting for the applications to come in, the applications that I receive are the ones that are scored and deemed qualified by the system
Before they get
to me.
okay.
So the only ones I'm seeing are the ones that have been through that first
They vet
line
them
of
first.
defense.
They vet them
Correct.
first.
They are not all of them.
Is this the computer system that's doing it or HR specialist?
So ultimately, that's where some of our findings came in, and I think, it's touched upon a bit in the response, is there isn't consistency in that process, that the computer system does a score. Okay. And depending on how you check some of the boxes in the system,
Right.
it generates, it's got an algorithm and all that
Yeah.
good stuff. It generates a score. But also, if you check the box, for example, that says, do you have any experience for a job that requires 2 years of experience, and you hit no, that score can, in fact, reject you in the system. Although we've talked to HR and there is the ability, obviously, for them to manually go through and look at that, and in some cases they do, we did not find that that's an automatic, consistent practice, that for every application that's rejected, there's an automatic manual review. I think, to their credit, some of them, they may receive 200 applications for it,
Right.
that,
Yeah.
they say, we just can't review 200. And I understand that.
Yeah.
But I hope that clears it up, that if there were 40 applications and 10 were rejected, the hiring manager is only seeing 30 of those.
So, and as a hiring manager, I don't have the ability to go into the system and say, let me just take a look at those other ones. I want to see the scores that it was given, but let me just take a look and yeah, that's right. I mean, again, if it's 200 versus whatever, but it doesn't right now. I don't have the option of doing that as a hiring manager.
Not automatically, which is the basis of the finding and the recommendation, is that
Yeah.
unless as a department director, I make contact with HR and say, I want to override this system and I want all of the applications, even the rejected ones, there is no automatic basis for that. And so that's the conversation that we're wanting to have based on.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, because I know there have been instances, I know Dr. Thomas and I work together in the school system, there have been instances where application might have got rejected. The hiring manager knew that person, knew they had the experience, but for whatever reason, it got
right,
reject it. Then say, well, hey, can I go back and pull
right,
that particular application? I want to look at it because, if I had that resume, look at that, and one look like in one little box to change their score.
right.
So,
So, I will say that, obviously HR has a responsibility and a liability from an EEOC
right, yeah, for
standpoint,
sure.
which completely acknowledge, and we want to ensure that that is the case, because we do want to avoid situations where it's a best friend of somebody,
Right,
and I really
right,
want this
right,
person,
right.
obviously that's the case.
Right.
What we perhaps disagree on a bit is by asking for those up front, we don't think it necessarily eliminates the review by HR ultimately to make sure that EEOC is being followed. If we're asking for all applications, even the rejected ones, and ultimately that hiring manager has to whittle it down to 3 or 4 that they want to interview, okay, those 3 or 4 are still acknowledged in the system and have to be turned over to the generalist before the interviews take place, for the generalist to be able to say, okay,
Right,
either there's a red flag here or there's not a red flag.
right,
So again, we're not asking for them to circumvent the EEOC process, but we do feel strongly there's a way in which to make this process a little more
Yeah.
convenient for some of the departments that want to see if there was in fact an error in the scoring system.
Well, and also to, like we said, they should be looking at it every time. And I know that's onerous, and that's just more paperwork, and you go, why you have the algorithm? Because so many times it's not yes or no with these things. I mean, I fill it out all the time when I'm doing insurance paperwork and going through underwriting. Like a classic example, just the other day with somebody, it was most insurance companies will say, for instance, this was a farm. We don't want to deal with any farmer who's new to farming. So have they owned a farm, yes or no? Okay, the answer is no. But in this particular case, this person grew up on a farm. They had 1,000 head of cattle, and he was the farm manager for that operation, which was a $10 million operation for the first 20 years of his life.
yeah,
So to say the answer is no,
He didn't own it on paper, but he
Yeah,
owned all of
exactly.
the responsibilities
Right.
for doing it.
That's not exactly right. And I'm sure when you're filling out, especially an employment application, anything at all where you're thinking, well, the answer is really should be yes, but I don't want to lie.
Right,
You're
right.
going to, cut your legs out from under you answering questions more often than not, I would think.
And I think that's an accurate assertion, because what we also found is just the opposite can happen. Is if you're really good at manipulating the system,
yeah,
I mean, you can lie through your teeth and click the
right,
box.
right,
Yeah,
that's right.
and all of a sudden you're getting
Yeah,
through
yeah.
the system. So there is some level of review, and I would argue, as you just pointed out, Mr. Blunt, that a lot of the answers are subjective.
Right.
And one of the things we talked with HR about is different ways in which we can clarify some of the supplemental questions that we ask. So for one that came about in many conversations was explain your supervisor experience, or how many years of supervisor experience you have. We need to qualify that, because my definition of supervisory experience is different than your definition of supervisory experience. And unless we put it in parentheses that it means, having
Overseeing 3 or more
and,
people.
correct, that, that can be interpreted differently. And are we losing candidates, for example, because somebody interpreted that question from the way that I would interpret it?
So Gavin, if I could
Sure.
add, this is an HR focused audit, and NeoGov is certainly within HR's wheelhouse. From my perspective, I'm hearing everything y'all say, and I totally agree, but here's what I would add. The hiring manager has a responsibility to be very clear on those supplemental questions.
Yeah.
HR does not know the position as well as the hiring
Right,
manager.
right.
So from my perspective, that's what I would push on, is that our hiring managers have to pay more attention and be more intentional about the questions that they ask.
Right.
Because HR can't
right,
know all the things. That's just not their role.
yeah,
And I was actually thinking that I was like, almost needs to be some type of, like when you're talking about standard operating procedures, but some type of training or process for those hiring managers to ensure that there's a level of consistency or thoroughness in getting at the information they really need to ensure that those positions are filled with the people that are most qualified to do that work. And you're right, HR has such a global
yeah,
overview that they're up here at this macro level, and there's no way they know general EEOC policies and procedures, but the little details that go into filling out that application or running your department, and there's just no way that's just too massive for them to know. So just really ensuring that those hiring managers have that knowledge and training
mhm,
and are able to articulate in those applications what they really need, to me, is just as critical as those HR folks
right,
themselves.
right,
Yes.
I'd like to add to that an observation because we followed 3 job postings through the entire process. And we were able to view both the qualified applications that were passed on to the hiring manager as well as the ones who were not. And one, you say knowledge for the hiring manager, if they're not seeing the ones that are not going through as qualified, they're not as able to refine those questions and that process,
Mhm.
because if they're only seeing the ones that got through, they don't see some people
Right.
that might be amazingly similar, or even because of their experience or how
Right.
they did get through the supplemental questions, they're not as, they don't have all the knowledge that they need in order to refine that process, in my opinion. So that was just one of the,
Mhm.
definitely the exercise that we did in following these hirings all the way through. That
Do,
was
do we have like an orientation? Again, going back to my experience, I don't think I had anything. I think I was just like, here, do this, go figure it out, go ahead. And that seemed like a whole. It was like, oh, I'm responsible for all this, but just figure it out. Do we have anything where we have like, some orientation, some coming back together with the hiring managers, that relationship or the training where hiring managers that are more experienced can share? Is there any forum? Is there any outreach so that people who are in that hiring position have standard operating procedures, go over processes, share experiences, so you have the person who's more experienced. Do we have anything there?
So, yes, but at the same time, I'll qualify that, and it is touched upon in our report here, that there are trainings that
Mhm.
HR will certainly make themselves available to.
Mhm.
What we discovered, it's more on a requested basis
Yeah.
as opposed to once a month,
Or
everybody knew.
institutionalized,
Correct.
right?
For example, using myself, I've never received formal training. I learned my stuff on my
Right.
own over the
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
But I think it goes back to that recommendation of that consistency and understanding, not just between
mhm,
employment division staff, but between employment and all of the departments, they
Right,
serve,
right,
which is a
right,
large, hefty
yeah,
task.
yeah,
But I think that's where you find that is that some of those hiring managers, the training they received is from the previous hiring manager in that department,
Right.
not from the person at
right,
HR that they're, working with,
right.
for example.
I'm gonna change the subject one more. I don't mean to like go on forever, but on the recruitment, which comes up and I think is a very pretty standard thing, where it basically was like, we're not, HR is not the outreach on the recruiting. So in special situations where there's a high need because of, what was it, low, I forget the great words you used, uh, but anyway, there aren't a lot of people available for various reasons, like having a, I'm just thinking about the commercial drivers, like for the buses,
Sure,
right, where we're really short, having a very, like, okay, in this kind of situation, we are going to have a real outreach to, I don't know, but training, opportunity, education, where does that, do we have a hole in there? Because again, as someone who was hiring myself, it was like um, you know, outreach for faculty at Athens-Tech, I didn't have any money no one said, hey, like, here are some ways you could get into certain markets or anywhere else to get a different pool or a more diverse pool. So is that, it seemed left out in that system. Is there any opportunity for that? Do we have anyone who feels they're responsible or empowered to do that?
So based on our analysis, and I think you'll see it in the response, is recruitment, according to HR, is not a function of them, is that it's essentially put on the departments individually that if you want to recruit in a special way other than, you know, the typical job posting, you know, you're on your own. I think they're certainly there to assist and give you ideas if that's what you want. I'm not saying they're not helpful, but I think from a government policy standpoint, recruitment has not been something that HR has been tasked with, according to them. And from what we've seen, there is no budget for recruitment in their division. I think it becomes ultimately a question going forward as to clarifying, will we recruit in HR or will it stay with the departments, and setting that tone one way or another, we do or we don't recruit. And if we do, whose responsibility it is, and can they then take it and run with it? I think that's, again,
I'm sorry, do the departments recruit?
well, again, it's based on whether they have a budget, whether they have the means and the time to do the recruiting on their own. So for example, you know, police.
Yeah.
Police being the largest department in the entire government, they have an opportunity to recruit. They have the budget for it, they have the manpower for it. And again, it's not to say HR is not helpful. They will certainly assist as needed and called upon, but HR is not leading that charge when it comes to the recruitment. The police department is leading that charge. And so if you're a smaller department or a department that's less familiar with recruiting, what we found is a lot of them were under the impression that, oh, well, when I submit my job application, you know, HR is taking care of that portion of it. But that's not necessarily the case. And so I think, again, it's just a matter of consistency and making it very clear we are going to or we are not going to recruit as a function of HR. Yeah.
And you also, I just wanted to mention that because you did have that, I mean, even just the use of the word recruit, because you have that place in here somewhere again where you're like, here, let me list all the places, positions that have the word recruit in them, and there's, you know, considerable numbers, but as somewhere else that I just opened, I mean, if recruit means just put something in a posting, that's, you know, that differentiation between proactive recruiting and just, you know, standard job announcement. And that seems to be where the problem lies.
Yeah. And I'll say that to HR's, you know, defense, they are clear and they don't hide the fact, like, for however many years, they have basically not been given the direction to recruit. So again, I think it becomes more of a policy or management type issue going forward, whether we maintain that status quo or we don't. But if you look back in the history section, where we did an analysis of the 2020 or 2000 Overview Commission, and recruitment was one of the findings of that. And it basically said, okay, you know, HR does a good job of posting the job, putting it up on a website, and then, you know, dispersing it to some churches or local nonprofits. From what we found now in 2024, that is the exact same practice 24 years later. And I don't think it's necessarily all on HR. I think they haven't been given the direction to do otherwise.
I don't think anybody's assigned any blame here. But
Sure.
But that has to change.
It does.
That's got to change.
And I think Carol, from our perspective,
Yeah.
if the budget is not there, and if the manager comes and say, hey, we want to extend our recruiting, maybe it's on us to say, you know, we want to put in recruiting, but and I say all that, we'll have to do a search eventually for a manager.
Right.
So who's gonna handle that search? Is it on the mayor commission?
Right.
Or will we ask?
An executive search team.
Right.
Exactly.
Or will we ask with HR
Mhm.
do that. So in my mind though, and again, because we've been doing, I think HR needs to be leading the charge when we do recruit positions. So again, I think we may have to come back and talk about that somewhere down the line, how that process works, and maybe it established, because everywhere I've been, we've always done aggressive recruiting, and HR have always taken that lead to do those types of things. To your point, trying to find transit drivers
Right.
on this with school district, we did a big push trying to get bus drivers, and but HR along with the transit department, our HR department led.
Right, well, and
Led that.
it would seem to be like needing to be a sort of a joint thing.
Yes, together. Yeah.
Right,
But again,
Because
I
I think
want to make sure that
But sometimes if
the,
it's
the money
joint,
is
then
there
no one
to make
does.
that happen.
no one,
That's
right.
Right.
So this is why I think audits are useful. You know, for years, we've done it a very specific way,
Mhm.
right? And no one's came in and said, hey, we should do it any differently. And meanwhile, HR is like, well, we kind of do it, but no one, we haven't been given further direction to do it,
Mhm.
further, if you will. So I say all that to say, I think HR is doing recruitment. However, I don't think we've defined what recruitment is.
Mhm.
So, I've gone through my own recruitments here. Well, one, to get this job, but two, to work to hire other department directors. And I can tell you that, HR's recruitment is NeoGov and maybe another place, professional organization. But even the professional organization, it goes back to the department. They don't know what the professional
Right.
organizations are. So if you
Right.
recruit for a county manager, you're going to put it at ICMA, you're going to put it at GCCMA.
Right.
You might want to put it in some other,
Basically, go.
But is there
at GMA, wherever.
is there money for that? I mean, because the situation where I was at was I'm like, okay, I want to put it in there, and they're like, well, there's no budget put it anywhere else.
There's not.
Yeah.
We haven't been intentional
Right.
about
I see what I see.
Yeah.
recruitment, right? So, if we become intentional about recruitment, we put money in the budget to do all the things.
Right.
There's a high likelihood that this might require a position. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying once we get down this rabbit
Yeah.
hole, there's a high likelihood that we might want one person to be doing all the things. Because right now HR is
Right.
yeah,
True.
But I think you have to do that. And even when the labor market calms down, you have to, in so many aspects of life, and specifically with this, you've got to go get the people.
That's right.
You can't rely on them to come to you.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not to say that the employees that do come to you are going to be just universally bad, but especially in those key positions, you've got to, I mean, it would help to have institutional knowledge on how to do this with someone who does this all the time. I mean, unless it was a situation where we had all throughout the county, the various departments, just hundreds of qualified employees that were constantly seeking work, then yeah, I mean, you've got a embarrassment of riches. That's not the case. That's just
Yeah,
not gonna be.
and I'm gonna give an example since we have the acting manager in here, where it's something where I have pointed out to people, in terms of law enforcement. Now, our police department's fine, but our sheriffs
Right.
we still need a lot of people. Well, again, at my Athens Tech World, we didn't used to have a criminal justice program, but the criminal justice program went like that. And every year I sat there and watched all the graduates and looked for students I had and everything else. Tons of people. And I'm like, and I mean, demographically, you can go up and you can see each program going up, and you're like, oh, all the dental hygienists are young white women, right? The criminal justice program were many Black students. Many of them, some of the Athens Tech students are from Clarke County, some from these 13 other, but a lot of them were from Clarke County. And I was like, how can there be like there's a new group, and some of the programs had like 5 people. Criminal justice was like, there's 25 people up there. I'm like, why are those people going right into our public law enforcement? And I would ask about that, and I'd ask, and I'm talking to Chief Sproul or other, and it's like, well, we go to their recruitment fair, and I'm not the boss here. I mean, I guess maybe I am sometimes, but I'm like, this needs to be like more than just going to the recruitment fair with Barrow County. It needs to be like a full relationship and mentoring to get, I mean, that there are all these young people. I don't know where they're going off, but where they're getting jobs or not, but it needs to be more than just showing up at that recruitment fair when we have this pool of people here. So again, maybe we are doing the best thing, and I am speaking out of turn here. But that kind of very forward thing.
I think that, I don't want to overlook on page 61 under our, findings of the, regarding defined goals, number 2, about establishing employer brands. It sounds to me like a lot of what you're talking about goes hand in hand with that recommendation is that, and I also don't want to overlook in our comparative analysis, looking at the qualitative analysis that we did in actually in one of the appendices are these employer brands from other counties. And so I think that might be a place where with this being a specific goal, if you're talking about somebody dedicated to making that goal happen and being able to then quantify results of how much money you're putting into this branding effort and any staff of that, and then how that is going to increase your successful.
Is the branding, you said there were examples in the comparative analysis of the branding?
Yeah, there's
In the appendix.
But what, you know, I'm making a suggestion to you all here that, you know, when that comes before us as a mayor and commission,
Yeah.
you know, I think we need a little more education on branding, because you're like, okay, that's like the toothpaste, you know, like I need more, you know, is this just about the logo? So
So you're speaking to my heart.
Toothpaste
Y'all
did it, right?
y'all know how I feel about telling our story.
yeah,
And, you know, there is some specific intentional recruitment that's needed, to your point, Commissioner Myers, but I would argue branding has been in the budget for, talk to Mr. Montgomery, for years,
yeah.
and it's not been approved. So for me, I believe telling the story of Athens, telling exactly who we are, who we want to be, why you need to come work for us, you know, what we're about is all important.
Yeah.
We don't have we have an identity, if you will, but it's not an identity that we've chosen. It's an identity that people have told us we are. So I think we need to own who we are, tell people who we are, and have the same message going out.
I would be saying that you, no blame here, need to do a better sales job with the commission, because I only see that at budgeting and it's branding. And I don't know what that means in terms of results and everything else. So if that's explained better, put that on like a work session.
But I think with the branding piece though, and I've seen it, and I haven't been in favor because it was about bringing somebody outside, and I think we need to talk about doing it internal more so than bringing somebody on board. I think that's why you had to push back from the commissioners, was hiring a firm to do it more so than let Jeff do it. So I think if we go that route, to your point, Carol, I think more the commission would be more on board instead of us.
Well, maybe joining it to recruitment rather than just, you know, a new logo.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I think to Judy's,
Oh,
go ahead.
No, it's
Okay,
okay.
everybody wants to jump in on this one.
Yeah. Well, no, it was kind of like back to a couple of points ago. Well, I guess actually to the branding point. The branding's more than just like the logo. It's also like communications holding turn. It's every department uses a different shade of blue. Every department has, sometimes the logo has the white background, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's no unity among what is happening within each of the previously 42, now more departments. Everyone kind of does their own thing. Like HR has their own logo sometimes that they use on documents that's different than we use on the website. And sometimes, yes, they can go in and ask the communications department what blue to use, like, is it more of a navy? Is it more of a royal blue? And they can only encourage. They can't, there's no policy SOP to do it. And then, so it's kind of just creating it. Like when you see that shade of blue, you think of Athens in the town or something like that. But also, it's kind of to your point earlier on like younger graduates, as you know, I was the intern there, but like for some of the other jobs while I was an intern, a lot of the stuff were those initial questions. So like lack of overarching, I guess, detail of like what certain experience and stuff
Yeah.
was. That was like constantly pushing me
Mhm.
and some of my other peers that have applied to these jobs out.
Which is another reason as to why it may be worth it to have some specific dedicated person who's in charge of that, and have it set up to where the individual departments, I would not say you would want to take away their involvement, obviously, in recruitment. They're gonna know what they need. You need that person, because I've experienced this many times in my career. To your point, a lot of the angst is right at the beginning. It's like, okay, what logo color do I use? And if you've got one person that you can call or email and ask that, and the other 20 questions you have, that knocks out a lot of frustration of trying to do this, which is not what matters. What matters is filling the position with someone who's qualified.
So I think to our recommendation, to everyone's point, is branding can sort of solve two problems at once. Not only are we branding, but it acts as a recruitment tool for us. If you have proper branding, it will recruit on its own. And it's more than a logo. It's the branding of ACC Gov as a community, but also as an organization, and also bringing to the forefront what it is we are offering as an employer over our competitors. You know, us pay aside, benefits, pension, time off,
Culture.
insurance, culture.
Look, first and foremost,
things like
not to
that.
interrupt you.
Yeah.
You get to live. Okay, we joke about that, but my God, I mean, how you, I'm sorry, I mean no disrespect to our other communities, they're not acting. And for God's sakes, that should be the first thing we talk about. Is yeah, you can go be a, do this, this, and this, and I'm not even gonna name a town, but just pick one, or you could do it here in Athens. Which would you rather do? All other things being equal.
Absolutely. I don't even think I could follow up on that.
You're hired for the new communications person. You just wrote yourself a job. Oh, good job.
So,
But
You're a manager, Jones.
Right.
The same
Yeah.
thing.
And just really quickly, I think what you hit and what Manager Jones and what you said, I think it is important to have someone who understands who you are and what it is to be Athens, because we've gone through a few branding efforts with the school district, and there are benefits to some of these wonderful big companies that come in from other places. But what I learned is that there is no generic way to tell your story. And so when someone from New York tries to come tell the story of Athens, it doesn't get told
This
from an Athens,
authenticity,
it's not an
That's interesting.
authenticity.
Yeah.
And we went through that. And so I was kind of I was chief of staff, and I went through all of those meetings, and we were looking at the color blues and the color yellows and the cyans and the this and the magentas. All of that's wonderful. But when someone then walks through that process and they don't have that historical understanding, because there is an intellectual and an emotional component that
Right.
just came out with you
Mhm.
that a generic person won't have. And so you can try to write this story and write this script, but absent a true fundamental organic understanding of the space and place that you're covering, you miss some of those key components that really make it a touching story. You know what I mean? A compelling
Right,
story. It
right.
becomes a generic story. And that, I think, is then where you still lose people. And so having that personal connection and understanding of place and community is just going to be critical as we do that work, for recruitment,
Yeah,
for
right.
branding, for PR, for
You got the job. You got the job.
Well,
I'll work for you, Carl.
Trey, I think all of us in this room, maybe except for the last person there on the right, are of enough of an age to realize, we've heard it. We've heard our whole lives, at least I know I did. It's that, oh, it's not based on how much money you make in terms of how well you do. And you sit there and you think to yourself, nah, that's just what people say who haven't been successful, what they say to justify what they haven't accomplished. Then you get to a certain point, you go, no, it doesn't matter. you could be paying me $5 million. And if I had to commute into Atlanta
I
every
had to
single
drive to Marietta
I-
every day, I'd
I
lose my mind.
I would go insane. To be happy
Oh, yeah.
is the only thing that matters. And if you can be happy making $20,000 a year, life's gonna be a lot easier
Well,
than if you
good
gotta
for
make,
you.
than if you gotta make $20 million.
Okay.
So not to belabor, we,
We've done that already. Yeah, Gavin tried to bring us back about 12 times.
so,
His ties
I'm
got
giving-
tighter and tighter around his neck over there.
I want to be respectful, but any other question, because I know there's gonna be a lot of discussion at our commission meeting
Yeah.
about this too, so. From the committee, any other thing, Karen, all your questions get answered.
Yeah, no, those are just points that, I think it is, again, I mean, one of the opportunities that we have on this committee, I was just thinking is that this is all we're focusing on. And again, when it comes to the commission,
Right.
it's, you get this, and this is one of 33 things on this agenda that you're getting. So I mean, I think in some ways, what I would, I'm thinking as well in terms of getting this out, and I think you may send it, I already do this, Gavin,
Mhm.
so, is get this out as early as we can to the commission. And maybe Commissioner Fisher and I think it's encourage our colleagues
To
to
read it.
review it
Yeah.
beforehand, because the rest of the agenda we get, I mean, it's all busy. I'm not complaining, but, we have a lot at the end. So if we get this out sort of early, because I'm afraid of some of these getting a little lost, some of these, audit reports. And I think there's a lot of good information in here.
So what I can do is, I could certainly work with the clerk and Manager Jones to see what options are available, knowing that, the mayor still has to set the next agenda, and I just don't want to step on toes by sending this out ahead of it
Well,
being.
the other thing is that on these things, this doesn't have to be, if it gets to a point where it's gonna be reviewed, it doesn't matter. You're not saying that it's going to be the agenda,
Sure.
you're just saying it's been approved and this is eventually
look
gonna
at
be
it.
on your agenda.
Yeah,
right.
And I think also asking, likewise, any of the commission themselves, if they need a paper copy, might be, some of them may or may not, but this is so, it's very helpful to have
It
this
is.
as a paper
Yeah,
version.
I mean, I completely agree with Carol, because I know with any of these things, you can say, oh, this is a bedrock fundamental issue that we've got to focus on. Look, this is how you hire everybody that does all these jobs. I mean, nothing is more of bedrock importance than this. I don't see how it possibly could be.
Okay,
Well, with that,
well, thank you, fellas.
well, is
Go ahead.
the committee comfortable taking action on
Yeah.
this, I guess?
Yeah,
is
do we
the
need,
Yeah.
yeah, we need, are
The
you all?
topic, in my opinion, the report itself and the information is useful. A lot of what we have taken your time on, and we
Mhm.
Oh,
apologize,
no. that's
is
the
really
word.
digging into
Yeah.
That's good.
how do you operationalize then what you have
Mhm.
provided.
Sure.
So I personally have no issue with the report. I
Yeah.
think the next issue, the next step is, what Manager Jones has alluded to and you've alluded to is then how do we make this useful? Commissioner, what you just said, how do we then make this useful? So I think we kind of got down into doing their work for them. But because that's who we are as individuals. But I have no problem from a personal end with the information in the report and the value add that it will bring to the department. So
Nor do I, and I think the discussion today was just a reflection of everybody's wanting to make it clear how important this is.
No, and as a commissioner who will be voting on it, I will again say that we don't have the opportunity to talk about this. So having two of us here who have this discussion, that is a worthwhile thing, because it then allows, it gives us sort of the background, the impetus to then follow through on it. So as much as it's taken some time to do, I think it's very useful for us, and then even for the manager here to have this discussion amongst us and see where we're going. Because like I said, there are not that many opportunities to have this. So I think that's,
Let me add, do you think This is so critical in my mind that we need to have a work session with the commission on this, or
I mean, I don't know how our manager feels on this, but I think
Yeah.
this actually would be really helpful. I mean, in terms of, let's say, the branding part of this and seeing where this builds into budgetary decisions later on, even though I think that would be helpful.
I think we could put together a work session on branding specifically. We can tie it to recruitment report.
right.
And that's what I heard, tie it to recruitment, because ultimately that is the bedrock of what we're talking about and the bedrock of our government. I would say 2 months. So what is August? Probably the September work session. I think we could be ready to go.
And we can maybe, I'm just thinking, we're not gonna meet in August,
As an audit committee.
right?
correct.
But I'm thinking. when's
Or
our
this
work
is
session?
the August meeting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm
Right.
thinking for this.
This is.
If we
it is
moved it,
August. No, it is
moved it
July.
Yeah, but
we
we shifted something.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get, when will the work session take place? What
I'm trying to make sure I give Jeff time. I need to go talk to Jeff immediately.
But you're talking about a different work session that focuses on branding versus a work session that goes
Versus
over
on the
this.
audit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I
Well,
thought I was hearing.
Okay, well, I think what I want, I think,
There's two
Two parts.
steps.
I think it's 2 steps. I think we need to, I think the commission really need to understand. And to Karen's point, because we get so much stuff. And I think this is such a critical part of our organization, what needs to happen
Yeah.
and what's going on. I think we maybe need to talk about this in branding.
Yeah, I think this is step one. I
Yeah.
think doing a work session
Yeah.
on this just before. I mean, it might be already filled up, that work session.
Right, yeah, for September.
We'll figure it out. And Ed, I'm just thinking out loud right now. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a work session done with an audit, but I'm sure it has happened in the past.
I think
So
we
maybe
did.
it's
thought we did.
maybe we have.
I think there are for certain important
Right, yeah.
audits and things like
Yeah,
that.
I think this one is important.
Yeah,
I
that
really
we
do.
can make that recommendation.
Yeah, and I say, let's say, should we wait? Do we have to vote to do the work session, or should we hold that work session, then come back to the audit committee to get a vote to move forward to vote on something?
So what I would suggest is, since we're not meeting as a committee in August, there's nothing wrong if you're good with the report itself, go ahead and recommending it up to the mayor and commission.
Yeah.
Now, what I can do in talking with the manager and even the mayor is, as long as we've got y'all's approval on this, it doesn't have to go on the next cycle automatically,
Right.
the mayor and commission for approval. We can try to work in a work session first. Then when the mayor, after the work session, put it on the mayor and commission cycle, but y'all don't have to worry about it because you've already
Right,
moved it up and
yes,
are pretty
okay,
clear.
yeah.
So that would be my recommendation to y'all is to, if you're comfortable, move it forward today and then sort of let that all play out at the mayor and commission level as far as the work session and approval goes.
Yeah, I agree. I'll make a
Okay.
motion to approve it.
Okay, so a motion had been made by Commissioner Myers, second by Dr. Thomas to,
Mr. Blunt.
I'm sorry, to Carl Blunt to accept the employee recruitment, hiring, orientation audit. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, sir.
All right. And I know I want to respect everyone's time. It's getting close. I'm gonna kind of work through this really quickly, but letter E, just wanted to, we've provided you a copy of the updated work plan that you all approved last month. It is on the mayor and commission cycle for this next one, so hopefully they'll approve it in August. But I just wanted to give you a copy based on your conditions of approval. We highlighted in the first or second paragraph in bold, sort of the commitment to Peace Corps. And then on the last page, under special projects, we specified the fact that cybersecurity was going to be a special project based on your advice. So that's the only thing that I wanted to sort of bring about on that topic. With regard to my update, not much other than in time, we don't have to do it today. We'll talk about the schedule going forward because there are going to be, maybe I anticipate, a few months where we're in the midst of doing our work on the next audit. You aren't going to have an approval of another audit probably for another 6 months. So there may be some times where we check in and then other months we just don't meet, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Peace Corps workload, we are balancing that right now. It's not, leaning one way or another. I think, the summertime has given us all an opportunity to sort of balance out. And, just keep in mind, again, we're not meeting next month. We'll pick back up on our regular session in September.
What day was that? I know.
The fifth.
September
Yeah,
fifth, yes.
yeah.
Make sure it's on my calendar right now.
And I mean, I really felt this was actually we were skipping, July, and that this was the August meeting that we were doing early because
Right.
Maybe.
people were
It
out.
could be, yeah.
Yeah,
I think Beth was not gonna
Beth
try
was going out of town and then she said,
Yeah, and I welcomed.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
Cohen.
She's going to
Paris,
France.
yeah, she's going to the Olympics.
She went somewhere, last weekend?
Yeah, she went last
Somewhere
weekend.
and got to the airport and they think that's where she got COVID because. Okay, so September fifth.
Fifth,
yep.
Put that on here.
But obviously, in between now and then, always email me or call me if you have any questions. But and we'll try to keep you updated as well on the status of this particular report as it goes through the mayor and commission level. So, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair. And
All right. Anything else for good of the order? If not, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
All right.
thank y'all. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you.